I found out my daughter was married through a photograph. No call, no invitation, no message, just a picture that happened to appear while I was scrolling online. Isabel, in a white dress, standing in a small garden, sunlight resting softly on her hair, and beside her was Ethan, smiling gently. The photo had a short caption, "Finally married. Just us." I read it twice. The word "just" made my heart freeze. I sat in silence in the house still filled with wedding flowers I had picked out months ago. On the table lay a notebook with unpaid bills, deposits for fresh flowers, dress rentals, invitation printing, all untouched, silent witnesses that I had once prepared for the day my daughter called her dream. But perhaps that dream no longer had a place for me. I remember clearly last Christmas morning when Isabel came over, her face colder than I had ever seen it. "I don't think I can invite Dad to the wedding if you're there." I thought I had misheard her. "Why?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because you and he can't be in the same place without turning everything into drama." I let out a faint laugh, one that caught in my throat. "I divorced him more than 10 years ago. Do you really think I still want anything from that man?" She didn't answer. She just lowered her head, then said quietly, as if announcing a decision long made, "I'll only invite Dad. Please don't come." That sentence cut through me like a cold blade. I had given birth to her, raised her through the years her father was absent, through the times I ate instant noodles just to save enough for her college tuition. And now, as she stepped into a new life, I was no one, nothing more than a name on a birth certificate. After that day, I still believed things would change, that Isabel would think again, that Ethan, her fiancé, would talk her out of such cruelty. But then March came, along with the pandemic. News of a small COVID wedding reached me through a neighbor. "Your daughter's married now. Congratulations." I thanked her quietly and closed the door. Inside the empty house, I could only hear the wall clock ticking, mocking me, tick, tock, tick, tock. Time went on, but my heart stayed behind. I remembered teaching Isabel how to write thank you notes, how to be polite, how not to make others feel forgotten. When she was 16, the year her father and I divorced, she cried and said, "Mom, no matter what happens, I'll always be with you." But a child's promise is like raindrops on a windshield, warm for a moment, then gone. I always told myself that every mother gets hurt by her child at some point, but I never imagined the day I would be erased from my daughter's happiest moment, like an ink mark crossed out on a page. A week after the wedding, Isabel called. Her voice was light, almost casual. "Mom, I want to host a little party here, like a wedding celebration. I want you to come." I almost choked. "Now you remember me after it's all done?" "Don't say that. We were so busy. It wasn't convenient then." "Convenient?" I interrupted. "It was convenient to get married, but not to call your mother?" There was silence on the other end. Then she said softly, as if offering me a favor, "I just want to make peace. I want you to dress up, like for the wedding, so we can pretend you were there." "Pretend." I laughed, a dry, brittle laugh that vanished into the cold air. "I don't need to pretend to be part of your life, Isabel. I was already there, for 30 years. That night, I took out the pale blue dress from the closet, the one I had planned to wear to her wedding. The fabric was still crisp, the tag still on. I ran my hand over it, wondering why I kept something that hurt so much. Maybe because it was the only symbol left of my love for her, a love that had been rejected. I wanted to throw it away, but couldn't. So I folded it carefully, like folding away an old memory, and placed it deep inside the drawer. Later, Thomas, my current husband, said, "Evelyn, you shouldn't take it to heart. She's just trying to control what she doesn't understand." I asked, "Control what?" "Guilt. She can't stand choosing sides, so she cut you out to avoid facing the truth." I stayed silent, because I knew he was right. But reason never heals what the heart feels. the pain of being abandoned by your own child. It's like watching yourself disappear from someone else's story, a story that began with you. A week later, Isabel hosted her family dinner. I didn't go. I sent her a card instead, short and simple. I wish you happiness. I hope one day you'll understand that love doesn't need a wedding to prove itself, only respect for those who sacrificed so you could grow. She never replied, but 2 days later, I got an email from Ethan. Thank you for the card. I think she still needs time. She's not ready to see things from your point of view. I read that line many times. Not ready to see things from your point of view. Perhaps being a mother means learning that some children will never grow enough to understand the love you gave. That night, I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, looking out at the garden behind my house. I realized that all these years, I had lived as if my life were a side story in my daughter's tale. Every joy, every saving, every dream, all revolved around her. And now that she's gone her own way, I don't know what's left except the emptiness. Betrayal doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from a small choice, a silence, a single photo online. But it's enough to collapse the world you thought was unshakable. I looked at the clock. Almost midnight. On the table, Isabel's unsent wedding invitation was still there. The paper edges curled, the words, Mother of the Bride, printed in silver ink. I placed it in the drawer, then turned off the light. That night, I didn't cry. Only one thought echoed clearly in my mind. If you can start over without me, then I can learn to live again. Without you. A week after finding out my daughter was married, I went to the market as usual. The small street was the same as ever. Mrs. Norton's bakery still smelled of cinnamon, and Lydia's flower shop overflowed with bunches of white daisies. I walked slowly, trying to avoid people's eyes, but in a small town, nothing stays unnoticed. Evelyn, I saw Isabel's wedding photos. She looked absolutely beautiful. Mrs. Norton's voice rang out from behind the counter. I smiled awkwardly. Yes, she's always been beautiful. So you didn't go? I thought you'd be sitting in the front row. That question made me freeze. I shook my head, forcing a smile. The pandemic, you know how it is. Oh, right, she said lightly. I heard it was just the groom's family, but at least they had such a cute little party. I paid and walked out. The bread in my hands was still warm, but my heart felt cold. When I got home, Thomas was sitting on the sofa reading the paper. He looked up, saw my face, and put it down. They said something again, didn't they? Nothing, I replied. People are just curious, that's all. Thomas sighed. You don't have to pretend to be strong. I know how much this hurts you. I didn't answer. I poured water into a glass, listening to the trickling sound like it was mocking me. In that moment, I felt so small, like a shadow in the house I had built. This house had once been where Isabel grew up. Every corner held traces of her childhood, the wooden chair where she learned to draw, the pencil marks on the doorframe tracking her height each year. Now, they were just relics of someone who no longer belonged to me. 2 days later, I got a message from Lydia, the florist. Evelyn, your daughter wanted to order her wedding flowers from me last month, but she canceled at the last minute. I thought maybe you'd gone with another vendor. I just found out the wedding happened. I'm so sorry. I read it again and again. No anger, just a sting. She apologized because she thought I knew, but in truth, the whole world knew. Everyone except me. That evening, I opened the cabinet and took out my expense notebook. Each trembling line recorded what I had paid for Isabel during the wedding preparations. Venue deposit, $2,500. Wedding dress, extra contribution, $1,200. Invitation design fee, $400. Wedding photos, $600. A total of more than $4,000. I had used part of my retirement savings, cut down on vitamins, skipped dinners out, all so my daughter could have the perfect day of her life. And then she got married without telling me a word. I didn't know whether to call it betrayal or just the cruelty of youth, but the feeling suffocated me. One afternoon, I decided to call Isabel. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. "Mom?" She sounded surprised. "I just wanted to ask if you got my congratulatory card." "Yes, thank you, Mom. Are you happy?" "Mom, I'm fine. I'm just really busy. Let's talk later, okay?" The line went dead. Just that. Talk later, as if motherhood could be put on hold like a dropped call. The next day, Mrs. Norton stopped by with a tart. "I saw Isabel and Ethan featured in the city's wedding magazine. Such a sweet article." She handed it to me. On the cover was my daughter, in her white dress, holding a blush rose bouquet. Beneath the photo were the words, "Because of the pandemic, we had a small and intimate ceremony with the people who truly matter." I sat still, staring at those words as if they were a verdict. The people who truly matter, and I was not one of them. That evening, I ate dinner alone. Thomas had to work late. The yellow light above the table cast shadows on a plate of cold food. I ate without tasting anything. In my mind, the images kept looping. Isabel in her wedding dress, smiling brightly, in a celebration I wasn't invited to. I used to think shame was about being humiliated in public, but no. The deepest shame is being erased from the picture, as if you never existed. 3 days later, Isabel called again. "Mom, I heard you're mad at me." "Mad? No, I'm just disappointed." "Mom, everyone says you're overreacting. I just wanted a peaceful day. You and Dad can't be together without making things awkward. I'm tired." I interrupted her. "You don't understand, Isabel. I didn't want to ruin your day. I just wanted to be there, as your mother, just to see you happy." "I don't want to argue. Honestly, you made everyone tense." Her words made my hands tremble. "I made everyone tense?" "Yes, I have to be honest. We just needed peace. You should learn to let go." I didn't say much after that. I just replied, "Let go? I let go of your father 10 years ago, but it turns out losing you is the hardest part." Isabel was silent. Then she said, "I'm sorry if you feel hurt, but I have to live my own life." The call ended, and I understood. That wasn't an apology. It was a declaration. After that day, I didn't go out. I turned off my phone, stayed off social media, but the news still found me, as if the world itself wanted to remind me that I had been erased from its joy. A message came from an old friend. "Evelyn, your daughter's wedding was beautiful. I didn't see you in the photos. Were you behind the scenes?" I deleted it, not out of anger, but out of shame. Shame for myself, for believing a mother's love could never be replaced. That night, I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the rain fall softly in the dark. I remembered when Isabel was little. She used to crawl into my arms and whisper, "Mom, when I get married, you'll be the first person I call, okay?" I believed that for 30 years. Now, I was the last to know. Thomas came home late. He sat beside me, saying nothing. Finally, he took my hand gently. "You know, Evelyn, sometimes children don't betray their parents out of hatred, but because they want to prove they're free from us. They think hurting us is the only way to feel independent." I looked at him. "And what are parents supposed to do?" "Accept it," he said. "But you don't have to forgive right away. Forgiveness only matters when you no longer have to lower yourself to give it." I nodded, but tears still fell, quietly, like the rain outside. That night, I wrote in my journal, "There are wounds that hurt even when no one sees them. There are shames that don't come from what others do, but from the silence of the ones we love most." Isabel chose that silence. And for the first time in my life, I am learning to be silent, not to lose myself. Shame is not just being excluded from a ceremony. Shame is when the child you raised treats you like a burden, when a mother's dignity is traded for a daughter's illusion of peace. But within that shame, I felt something begin to stir, not resentment, but awakening. Maybe it's time I live as an individual again, no longer Isabel's mother, but Evelyn, the woman who once loved, once lost, and will learn to rise again. The next morning, as sunlight brushed against the curtains, I woke up feeling something different. It wasn't the dull ache that had followed me for days, but something solid, cold, and clear. I sat up, made a cup of coffee, and looked around the house. Unusually quiet. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of silence. Before, every morning, I used to call Isabel. It was a habit from her college years, just to ask, "Did you have breakfast?" Or, "I sent some money to your account, remember to pay the rent." The messages, the transfers, the calls, I once thought they kept us close. Now I realized they had only turned me into a shadow of myself. That morning, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. The line, "Scheduled transfer, Isabel Hartman, $500 month," appeared. I paused. Then, without hesitation, I clicked Cancel Recurring Payment. A small act, just a few clicks, but it felt as if I had just unlocked an invisible chain that had wrapped around my neck for 3 years. That afternoon, Isabel called. "Mom, I got a bank notification. Is there a mistake? I haven't received this month's money." I took a deep breath. "No mistake. I canceled it." Silence. Then her voice tightened. "What did you just say?" "I said I canceled it. You don't need my support anymore. You have a husband, a job, a life. I need to take care of myself, too." "Mom," Isabel almost shouted, "are you punishing me? Because of the wedding? I said I was sorry." "No, Isabel," I said calmly. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just done mothering an adult." That evening, Ethan called. His voice was gentler. "Mrs. Evelyn, I know you're hurt, but Isabel is panicking. She thinks you hate her." "It's not hate," I said. "But maybe she needs to learn how to stand on her own feet. I've been a mother long enough. Now I need to be a person." The line was quiet. Then Ethan sighed. "Maybe you're right." 3 days later, Isabel showed up at my house. I saw her car from afar, the SUV I had once helped pay for. She stepped out, her face tense, no makeup. "We need to talk," she said. No greeting, no glance around. I invited her in. In the living room, the air was thick, like a courtroom with no judge. "Mom," Isabel began, "you can't just stop helping us out of nowhere. Ethan and I are still paying student loans, rent, insurance. You both have jobs. Not enough, and you know it. We're not stable yet. You promised you'd help until we got on our feet." I looked straight at her. "You are on your feet, Isabel. You're just too used to being carried." She fell silent. Her eyes flickered, then hardened into accusation. "I don't understand why you're doing this. You're making people think you're unstable." My eyebrow lifted. "Unstable?" "Yes. People are saying you've been acting strange, cutting off support, avoiding contact, saying hurtful things. Are you okay?" A chill went through me. I understood what she was implying. Isabel wasn't just angry. She was setting a stage. In this society, it's easy for the elderly to be labeled mentally unfit. Once that happens, a single legal document can hand a child control over a parent's assets. "You're talking about filing for guardianship, aren't you?" I asked slowly. She blinked, surprised that I caught on so quickly. "Mom, don't exaggerate." "No, Isabel, I'm just stating the truth." When she left, I watched her car disappear down the driveway. I knew from that moment the bond between us had fractured beyond repair. This wasn't misunderstanding anymore. This was war. The next day, I went to see Mr. Halloway, my lawyer, a silver-haired man with steady eyes. "I want to protect my assets," I said, "before my daughter decides to take them." He nodded without prying. "We'll set up a financial protection plan. You can authorize me to hold your banking records, update your will, and restrict access rights." I signed the documents, my hand trembling but firm. As I left, Mr. Halloway looked at me and said softly, "You're doing the right thing. Sometimes to preserve love, we must learn to say no to the ones we love." That evening, I called Thomas. He was away on business. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am," I said. "Just tired, but I finally did something I never dared before." "Cutting the chain of dependence?" "Yes. I've lived too long under the guilt of being a mother. Now I want to live as a woman." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Evelyn, you haven't lost Isabel. You're just forcing her to grow up. It hurts, but it's necessary." A week passed. No calls, no messages from Isabel. Then on Friday, an email arrived from an unfamiliar address. Subject line, "Notice of Guardianship Inquiry." I opened it and read slowly. A preliminary filing requesting evaluation of my mental and financial capacity. Applicant, Isabel Hartman Cole. I laughed, a dry, bitter laugh that reached the bone. She actually did it. I called Halloway that night. "Stay calm," he said. "This is just the first step. They'll try to prove you're unfit to manage your finances, but we have ways to fight it." "I'm not afraid," I said. "I'm just sad. I gave birth to a daughter who now sees her mother as a broken ATM." The next day, Isabel came again. No flowers, no apology, just a large envelope of paperwork. "These are from my lawyer," she said. "They just want to make sure you're properly taken care of. If you cooperate, this will go smoothly." "I'm not dead yet, Isabel," I said, "and I'm not insane." "Mom, don't take it the wrong way. I'm only worried about you." "No, you're worried about my money." She stiffened, then spoke softly, sweet as poison. "Mom, we both know that in the end, all this will be mine anyway. Why make it so hard?" I looked straight at her. "Because you haven't earned it." When she left, I called Joan Wallace, my oldest friend, the one who'd seen everything. She came over, sat across from me, and gripped my shoulder. "Evelyn, she's crossed a line. But don't let yourself become the victim. Fight back." "How?" I asked. "With truth, with the law, and by living better than anyone expects." Joan helped me gather documents, print every transfer receipt, every expense record from the past years, proof that I was neither dependent nor incompetent. "You'll win," she said, "because you have something your daughter doesn't. Dignity." That night, I couldn't sleep. I went out to the garden, where the rose bush Isabel and I planted when she was 10 was still blooming. I remembered when she once fell, scraped her knee, and I held her tight, saying, "Mom's right here." I'm still here, just not for her anymore. I wrote in my journal, "Tomorrow I will begin again. No longer the fragile mother waiting for her child's forgiveness. I will return to the woman I once was, the one who knew how to stand tall before love taught her to forget how to live alone." In the morning, I put on my coat and left the house early. I went to the bank and asked to open a new account. The clerk asked, "Reason for change?" I smiled. "To protect what I've worked my whole life for. Not the money, but the right to be free." When I stepped out of the bank, the cold wind brushed against my cheeks. I knew this was only the beginning. Isabel wouldn't stop. But neither would I. I was no longer the mother begging to be loved. I was Evelyn Hartman, and I was ready to fight, not to win back my daughter, but to win back myself. That morning, when the court clerk read my name, Evelyn Hartman, her voice echoed through the small courtroom, sharp against the cold light. I stood, adjusted my coat, and stepped to the witness stand. I did not tremble. Not anymore. Across the room, Isabel and Ethan sat side by side. She didn't look at me, her eyes fixed on the thick stack of papers before her. Beside them was a man with silver hair and a perfectly tailored black suit, Dr. Pierce, their lawyer. Next to me, Mr. Holloway turned a page in his notebook, calm as ever. A part of me still wanted to believe Isabel had done this out of concern, out of some misunderstanding. But when I saw her signature on the guardianship petition, that thought vanished. "Mrs. Hartman," Judge Margaret Lewis said evenly, "do you understand the purpose of today's hearing?" "I do, Your Honor," I replied. "My daughter believes I am no longer capable of managing my own finances or life." "And how do you respond to that claim?" I took a deep breath. "I respond that it is false, and it is painful." The judge nodded, jotting something down. "Very well. We'll hear from both sides." Dr. Pierce rose first, his tone smooth, professional. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Isabel Hartman Cole, brings this petition not out of self-interest but concern. Mrs. Hartman has exhibited erratic behavior, abruptly canceling regular financial support, cutting off communication, self-isolating, and expressing paranoid delusions regarding her assets." "Do you have specific evidence?" the judge asked. Pierce held up a folder. "We have bank statements, neighbor testimonies, and a statement from a pharmacist confirming Mrs. Hartman's refusal to take prescribed anxiety medication." I glanced at Holloway. He gave a small nod. Steady. Then Isabel stood. She looked toward me. Still beautiful, her eyes bright, yet foreign. "I just want to help my mother," she said, voice trembling, perfectly performed, enough to make a few people in the room nod sympathetically. "After my parents' divorce, she carried so much stress. She's easily emotional, fearful of being exploited. We only want to make sure she's safe." That "we" echoed with intent. She didn't say "I," she said "we," to legitimize her husband's right to intervene. Pierce turned to me, expressionless. "Mrs. Hartman, how do you respond to your daughter's statement?" I lifted my head. "My daughter is right about one thing. I have been under pressure, but not because of age or illness, because I raised a child who doesn't know where love ends and greed begins." The courtroom fell silent. Pierce's lips tightened. "Objection, Your Honor. Inflammatory statement." Judge Lewis looked at him. "Overruled. Mrs. Hartman may continue." I went on. "For the past 3 years, I have given Isabel and her husband nearly $30,000 for rent, for cars, for student loans. When I stopped, they filed a petition to take control of my finances, calling it concern for my safety. If that's concern, perhaps we need a new definition of family." Holloway stood, his voice calm but resolute. "Your Honor, my client is entirely competent. We have full documentation of her health and finances. She has undergone an independent evaluation. Her cognitive results exceed the average for a 60-year-old. He placed a file on the judge's bench. "This is the report from Dr. Moore, licensed psychologist." Judge Lewis skimmed through the report, her brow lifting. "The findings are quite clear." Pierce interrupted. "That report may be biased. It was commissioned by the defense." Holloway's reply was slow and cutting. "As biased as the pharmacist's testimony, obtained under pressure from Mrs. Cole?" The room stirred. Pierce flushed. "There's no proof of that accusation." "There is," said Holloway, retrieving a flash drive. "This is an audio recording of Mr. Green, the pharmacist, admitting he was asked by Isabel Hartman Cole to sign a false statement." Isabel flinched. Pierce stammered, "Your Honor, I request time to review this evidence." The judge tapped her gavel lightly. "Enough. Continue." Then the witness, Joan Wallace, took the stand. My longtime friend. "Mrs. Wallace, how long have you known Mrs. Hartman?" the judge asked. "Over 20 years," Joan said with a gentle smile. We work together at the city library. Evelyn is meticulous, thoughtful, and sharp. I've never seen any sign of cognitive decline. If there's anything unusual about her, it's that she's been too generous with her daughter. A few people chuckled softly, then fell quiet again. The judge made more notes. When Joan stepped down, I was called to speak one last time. I walked slowly, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice was steady. I didn't come here to win or lose against my daughter. I came to remind the court of a simple truth. Love is not a license to take. I turned to Isabel. You know, sweetheart, I used to think losing money didn't matter, as long as you were happy. But when you tried to make me legally incompetent, you took the only thing I had left, my dignity. Isabel bowed her head, said nothing. Ethan avoided my eyes. After the testimonies, the judge called a recess. Holloway and I sat in the waiting benches. He leaned over. You're astonishingly calm. I smiled faintly. When you're pushed to the edge, calm is the only weapon left. Across the room, Isabel glanced at me, her eyes red. For a brief moment, I saw the little girl she once was, the one afraid of the dark, who could only sleep while holding my hand. And I wondered, had my overprotection taught her that love meant control? When Judge Lewis returned, the room fell silent. She opened the file and spoke clearly. After reviewing all evidence and testimonies, the court finds that Mrs. Evelyn Hartman is fully competent, financially and mentally. The petition for guardianship is hereby denied. Furthermore, the petitioner, Mrs. Isabel Hartman Cole, is prohibited from accessing or using her mother's financial information for a period of 12 months without written consent. The gavel struck. Each sound peeled away another layer of fog from my chest. Isabel sat frozen. Pierce lowered his head, gathering his papers. Ethan turned toward me, murmuring, I'm sorry, Mrs. Evelyn. I nodded, said nothing. Outside, sunlight poured onto the courthouse steps, almost blinding, like life rushing back after a long coma. Joan was waiting at the gate, wrapping me in a hug. See? I told you, the truth always wins. I smiled, my voice hoarse. Not the truth, Joan. Dignity. That evening, I went home alone. On the table, the vase of hybrid roses still bloomed, the kind Isabel used to love. I poured a glass of wine, opened the window, and let the wind fill the quiet room. Justice didn't make me happy. It simply made me light, like someone who had finally cut away a tumor she'd carried too long. Before bed, I wrote in my journal, I stood in a courtroom and proved I was still sane, but more importantly, I became clear-headed in my own life. My daughter lost the case, and I won myself. The next morning, the clerk sent me the official decision. Beneath the judge's signature was a small note, Case closed, subject mentally competent and emotionally stable. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to send a copy to Isabel, but then I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer, beside the pale blue dress I had once planned to wear to her wedding. Two relics of two losses, one of motherhood, one of trust. When Joan called, her voice was bright. Evelyn, let's celebrate. There's a little lakeside place with great white wine. I laughed. All right, but this time it's on me. I have my own assets after all. Joan chuckled. And I have a friend, a woman who just won back her entire life. I looked out the window at the falling dusk. In the quiet, I whispered, Justice isn't for revenge, it's to end humiliation. And I knew that from that moment on, my life had begun a new chapter, one no one else would ever write for me again. A year after the trial, the little house on Maple Street had a new coat of paint. I chose a pale shade of blue, the kind people say symbolizes peaceful beginnings. When the painter finished the last stroke, I stood watching the sunlight reflect off the fresh wall and realized something. For the first time in years, I truly felt present, no longer caught between the past and what if. I used to think rebirth was something grand, that it required miracles, fateful encounters, or extraordinary journeys. But it turns out, it's simply waking up one morning with a heart as light as paper, knowing you no longer need anyone else to validate your worth. Every day, I began with a walk around the lake. The morning breeze carried the damp scent of water and the soft flutter of wild ducks. I often stopped by the willow tree, the same spot where Isabel once sat drawing with me when she was little. Now, when I paused there, I no longer felt loss, only a quiet kind of gratitude. No matter how far my daughter goes, there will always be a corner of the sky in my heart reserved for her. But it's no longer a place for pain to live. I started a small art class at the community center, teaching painting to middle-aged women. On the first day, 6 of them came. They brought their own stories, eyes that had once sparkled, then dimmed with the fear of being forgotten. I opened the class with a sentence. We don't paint to create beauty. We paint to remember that we still have hands and the right to touch the world. A woman named Marjorie cried right then and there. She said, "I thought 65 was too late to begin again." I smiled. Age doesn't measure our capacity for joy, Marjorie. It only measures how long we've endured. In April, the center invited me to host a small exhibition titled The Second Bloom. I accepted. At the opening, my section had only 3 paintings. Still Here, a woman sitting by a rose bush, the first piece I painted after years of silence. The courtroom light, sunlight streaming through the courthouse window, where I found my voice again. The lake in spring, the newest one, calm waters, a whisper of wind. Beneath them, I wrote a small note. Each painting is a wound turned into light. Joan, as always, was the first to arrive. She looked around and said softly, "See, Evelyn? The light isn't just coming from the sun anymore. It's coming from you." I smiled. Maybe because I finally stopped hiding in someone else's shadow. Isabel hadn't come. I didn't expect her to. But that afternoon, just before the exhibit ended, I saw a familiar silhouette by the doorway. A beige coat, a bouquet of tulips in her hand. No introduction was needed. One glance was enough. My daughter had come back. She walked slowly, stopping in front of Still Here. After a long silence, she said, "I read your letter and I came because I wanted to see where you live now, not just where you were hurt." I replied gently, "This room is where I learned to forgive, not you, but the version of me who couldn't let go." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Mom, I'm sorry. There's no excuse for what I did." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Some mistakes need time more than apologies, but I believe you're finding your way." We stood quietly. No tears, no embrace, just 2 women side by side, looking at a painting of peace and wholeness. For the first time in years, I didn't feel any distance between us. A few days later, Isabel sent an email. "Mom, I'd like to visit on Sunday, if you're willing." I replied, "My door is always open, but come as an adult, not as a child who needs rescuing." On Sunday, she came. She helped cook lunch, set the table, talked about her new job, her therapy sessions, and how she'd started learning to paint. We didn't talk about the court or the past. We talked about the future, something I once thought was closed between us. Before leaving, she looked around the house and said, "The house looks so different." I smiled. So do I. I no longer delude myself that things will ever be the same. Some cracks, even when healed, still leave faint lines across the surface. But I've learned to love those lines. They remind me that I've survived pain without turning bitter. That summer, Joan and I took the painting class on our first retreat, a seaside trip up north. We brought paints, paper, and baskets of homemade bread. In the morning, I sat on a cliff and watched the sunrise. The sea before me was a mirror, reflecting everything I had left behind. Joan sat beside me and asked, "If Isabel never changes, would you regret forgiving her?" I shook my head. Forgiveness isn't about giving someone else another chance. It's about freeing yourself from the memory of harm. She smiled. That sounds like something out of a book. I laughed. No, it's a lesson written in a mother's blood. One night I wrote in my journal, I once thought justice was the destination, but it's only a turning point. Freedom is the road, and on that road, I'm no longer a mother begging for love. I'm a woman living the life she chose. When autumn came, I received an envelope from the community center, an invitation to speak at a conference on financial and emotional independence for older women. I laughed out loud, not from surprise, but from the irony of life. From being called an incompetent old woman, I was now being asked to speak about autonomy. That day, I stepped on stage under soft golden light. My silver hair glowed. I began with a simple line. People say old age is the autumn of life, but if you keep planting flowers, autumn can still bloom. The audience laughed, and I told them my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor, lighthearted, without bitterness. When I finished, the applause rose warm and long. Among the crowd, I saw Isabel sitting in the back row, her eyes shining. That night, she stayed over. We sat on the porch, sipping tea. The full moon was bright enough to trace the veins on my hands. Mom, she whispered, I'm learning how to love without hurting. I want to learn from you. I smiled and took her hand. Then remember, Isabel, love doesn't mean holding on. Sometimes, love means letting someone be free. She rested her head on my shoulder. We sat in silence, listening to the crickets and the wind in the trees. No more words were needed. The next morning, as she left, she turned and said, I'll visit often, not to ask for anything, but to share. I nodded. That's the only way love grows up. I watched her car disappear behind the willows, feeling peaceful, not because she came back, but because I knew, even if she never did, I'd still be all right. A few weeks later, I hung a new painting in the living room. The garden at dusk, a garden bathed in golden light, the rose bush in full bloom. Beneath it, I wrote, No season ever truly ends, only those who forget to plant again. I knew it was my last message to myself. Now, when I sit by the window each morning, I no longer count what I've lost. I count what remains, a clear mind, a home filled with light, a heart that has learned forgiveness, and above all, a life, still moving forward, shaped by my own hands. My name is Evelyn Hartman. I lost the daughter who once was my whole world, and found the woman who always was. I am no longer afraid of solitude. I am no longer afraid of age. I fear only one thing, forgetting that I was once strong enough to begin again. Dawn breaks. I pick up my brush and lay the first stroke on a white canvas. A soft blush of pink spreads, like the first light of morning. The painting is called The Day After. One chapter closes, but my life, after all the loss, has only just begun.